Sometimes a single whispered sentence can unlock a door that time itself could never keep closed. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm golden light across the grand ballroom as waiters moved quietly between elegantly dressed guests attending the annual Brooks Global Foundation Charity Gala in downtown Chicago. Soft piano music floated through the room, while conversations about business, philanthropy, and success blended into a steady hum beneath the polished ceiling. At the center of it all stood Nathan Brooks, the 39-year-old billionaire CEO, whose calm confidence had become almost legendary in the business world. Wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal tuxedo, he greeted donors and community leaders with the same composed smile he offered every year. To everyone watching, he appeared completely in control, the kind of man who never allowed emotions to interrupt reason. Across the ballroom, 22-year-old Emily Parker adjusted the simple black server's apron tied neatly around her waist. Her fair skin and light brown hair framed a face that looked younger than the responsibilities she carried every day. She had accepted an extra catering shift because every additional dollar mattered. Hospital bills continued arriving every week, and her mother's treatments left little room for anything beyond survival. Emily carefully balanced a silver tray filled with sparkling water glasses as she navigated through groups of guests who barely noticed she existed. She had learned long ago that people wearing uniforms often became invisible in rooms filled with wealth. Still, she kept her shoulders straight and her expression polite. Her mother had always reminded her that dignity did not depend on the size of a paycheck. Near the center of the ballroom, a photographer suddenly stepped backward while trying to capture Nathan speaking with several board members. Startled, Emily instinctively shifted to avoid colliding with him. One glass slid across the tray, tipping just enough for a splash of water to spill onto the marble floor. She immediately knelt to prevent anyone from slipping, apologizing softly before anyone could react. To her surprise, another person crouched beside her at exactly the same moment. A steady hand picked up the fallen crystal glass before it could roll away. "Are you all right?" the man asked with genuine concern rather than irritation. Emily looked up. It was Nathan Brooks himself. There was no impatience in his eyes, no embarrassment over kneeling on the polished floor while expensive dress shoes surrounded him. He simply offered the glass back with a quiet smile. "These things happen," he said. No one was hurt. Emily accepted the glass with trembling fingers. For a brief moment, she studied his face far more carefully than any stranger normally would. Something about him stirred a distant memory she could not explain. Not a memory of her own, but one borrowed from countless conversations at her mother's bedside over the years. Nathan noticed her expression change. "Is everything okay?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated. She lowered her voice until it became little more than a whisper meant only for him. "My mom knew you." The smile disappeared from Nathan's face so suddenly that it seemed the music itself had faded. Every trace of color drained from his expression. His steady blue eyes widened with quiet disbelief as though he had just heard the name of someone he had buried inside his heart decades earlier. Around them, the gala continued without interruption. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked together. Cameras flashed across the ballroom. Yet inside Nathan's mind, time had stopped. He searched the young woman's face once more, noticing details he had somehow missed before. The gentle shape of her eyes, the familiar curve of her smile, the tiny silver necklace resting against her collarbone. None of it made sense, and yet every instinct told him that the past he believed was gone forever had just walked back into his life, wearing a server's apron and carrying a silver tray. For several long seconds, Nathan Brooks forgot that hundreds of guests surrounded him. The cheerful conversations faded into distant echoes as he continued looking at the young woman standing before him. His voice, usually calm during billion-dollar negotiations, became almost hesitant. "What did you say?" Emily lowered her eyes, suddenly realizing how strange her words must have sounded. She shifted the silver tray back into both hands and offered an apologetic smile. "I am sorry. I should not have said anything. My mother used to mention your name many years ago. I probably should have kept that to myself." Nathan remained perfectly still. The practiced composure that had guided him through countless public appearances seemed to disappear behind a quiet uncertainty. "What is your mother's name?" he asked softly. Emily hesitated for only a moment. "Sarah Parker." The name landed with the weight of a forgotten lifetime. Nathan's fingers slowly loosened around the crystal glass he was still holding. Every sound inside the ballroom seemed to vanish again as memories he had buried beneath decades of work suddenly pressed against the surface of his mind. Before he could speak, one of the event organizers approached with an anxious smile. "Mr. Brooks, the board is ready for your speech. Everyone is waiting." Nathan did not immediately respond. His eyes never left Emily. "Please tell them I will be there in a few minutes." The organizer looked surprised, but nodded politely before walking away. Emily took a small step backward. "You really should not keep everyone waiting because of me." Nathan finally found his voice. "Sarah Parker, where is she now?" Emily's expression softened. "She is at home." After a brief pause, she quietly added, "She has been very sick for a while." Nathan felt an unfamiliar heaviness settle across his chest. He searched Emily's face again, noticing details he had overlooked before. The gentle kindness in her eyes reminded him of someone he had once known better than almost anyone. Even the way she stood, quietly respectful without asking for sympathy, felt strangely familiar. Emily noticed him looking at the small silver necklace resting against her collarbone. Instinctively, she touched it with her fingertips. "My mother gave this to me when I turned 16, she explained. "She always told me never to lose it because someone important had once given it to her." Nathan stared at the necklace without saying a word. The delicate silver pendant was shaped like a tiny compass. Years ago, while working evenings and attending college during the day, he had spent nearly 2 weeks saving enough money to buy that exact piece of jewelry from a small shop near campus. He had believed it was long gone, along with every dream attached to it. Emily misunderstood his silence. "It probably does not mean anything to you," she said gently. "My mother never explained where it came from. She only smiled whenever I asked." Nathan drew a slow breath, forcing himself back into the present before emotion revealed more than he was ready to share. "Would your mother remember me?" Emily answered without hesitation. "She never forgot you." Those 4 words settled more deeply than any business award or public recognition Nathan had ever received. Across the ballroom, applause suddenly erupted as guests assumed the evening program was about to begin. Bright camera flashes illuminated the stage while musicians prepared for the next announcement. Yet Nathan remained exactly where he stood. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the future no longer felt like the most important part of his life. Instead, the unanswered questions waiting somewhere inside a modest home where Sarah Parker still lived suddenly mattered more than every speech, every meeting, and every success he had spent decades building. The applause continued echoing through the ballroom as Nathan slowly made his way toward the stage, but every step felt strangely disconnected from the polished confidence that had defined him for years. He thanked donors, spoke about expanding educational programs, praised the generosity of the community, and smiled for photographs exactly as everyone expected. Yet behind every carefully chosen sentence, one name refused to leave his mind: Sarah Parker. The moment the final guest rose for another standing ovation, Nathan quietly excused himself from a group of executives and walked alone toward a private hallway overlooking the city. The glittering skyline stretched across the night like 1,000 distant stars, but he barely noticed it. Instead, memories he had spent decades outrunning began returning one by one. 20 years earlier, he had not been a billionaire or a CEO. He had been a college student working every evening at a neighborhood bookstore just to keep paying tuition. His apartment had been so small that the kitchen table also served as his desk. Every month became a careful calculation between rent, textbooks, and groceries. It was there that Sarah had entered his life. She had worked mornings at a local bakery before attending nursing classes in the afternoon, always carrying a backpack filled with medical textbooks and a quiet determination that inspired everyone around her. She had never spoken about hardship as though it were something special. She simply faced each day with remarkable grace. Nathan remembered the winter afternoon when his aging car finally stopped running outside the bookstore. He had been ready to give up on the semester because without transportation, he would lose both his job and his classes. Sarah had quietly driven him to work every morning for nearly 3 weeks before he even realized how much extra time it added to her own schedule. Whenever he thanked her, she always smiled and answered the same way. "People are not interruptions. They are the reason we are here." Nathan had never forgotten those words. even if he had buried the person who first spoke them beneath years of endless meetings and responsibilities. Another memory surfaced. Graduation day. They had walked across the campus together beneath blooming trees while talking about dreams that still seemed impossibly far away. Nathan wanted to build a company that treated people with dignity. Sarah wanted to become the kind of nurse who never allowed patients to feel invisible. Before they parted that afternoon, he had given her a small silver compass necklace. "So you always remember where home is," he had told her with an awkward laugh. Sarah had smiled before fastening it around her neck. "Home is never a place," she had replied softly. "Home is the people who remind you who you are." Nathan closed his eyes as the memory faded. Life had changed quickly after graduation. A business opportunity had taken him across the country. Phone calls became fewer. Letters stopped arriving. He had convinced himself that time simply carried people in different directions. Standing alone in the quiet hallway, he now realized how little he actually knew about what had happened after they lost contact. Emily's face returned to his thoughts, followed by the silver compass resting against her collarbone. Sarah had kept it all those years. She had spoken about him often enough that her daughter recognized his face the instant they met. Nathan slowly reached into his jacket pocket and removed the folded speech he had prepared for the evening. Looking at the carefully written pages, he understood something that unsettled him more than any business challenge ever had. He had spent 20 years building an extraordinary future while never asking what had become of one extraordinary person from his past. The gala finally came to an end just before 10 o'clock, but Nathan remained in his office overlooking the Chicago skyline long after the last guests had gone home. The city below shimmered beneath the evening lights while untouched paperwork rested across his desk. Normally, he would have reviewed financial reports before midnight. Tonight, he could not bring himself to read a single page. Instead, he pressed the intercom. "Rebecca, before you leave, could you come in for a moment?" His executive assistant entered carrying a tablet and a notebook. She immediately noticed the unusual seriousness on his face. "Is everything all right?" Nathan hesitated before answering. "I need your help locating someone." Rebecca nodded without asking unnecessary questions. "Who are we looking for?" Nathan looked toward the window before quietly saying the name he had not spoken aloud in decades. "Sarah Parker." Rebecca began typing into the secure company database, searching only publicly available records and information Nathan was authorized to request through legitimate investigative services. Several moments passed in silence. Finally, a profile appeared. "I found a Sarah Parker matching the age range," Rebecca said carefully. "Current residence is a small apartment on the northwest side of Chicago. Employment history shows she worked as a registered nurse for many years before leaving the profession about 18 months ago because of a long-term medical condition." Nathan listened without interrupting. Rebecca continued reading. "There are no significant financial assets. Property records indicate she rents a modest apartment. Her emergency contact is listed as Emily Parker." Nathan lowered his eyes. Everything Emily had told him was true. "Can you find out where Emily works?" Rebecca searched again. "She has 2 active part-time jobs. One is with the catering company that handled tonight's gala. The other is at a neighborhood coffee shop several mornings each week." Nathan remained silent. Rebecca carefully set the tablet on his desk. "Would you like me to contact them?" Nathan immediately shook his head. "No." His answer came so quickly that even he seemed surprised. "I do not want anyone feeling pressured because my name is attached to the situation." Rebecca waited patiently. Nathan finally spoke again. "If Sarah spent all these years without asking me for anything, I am not going to begin this chapter by taking away her daughter's dignity." Rebecca offered a respectful smile. "That sounds like the Sarah Parker you have described over the years." Nathan looked up in surprise. "I have talked about her." Rebecca nodded gently. "Not often. Only in small moments. Whenever someone asked why our scholarship program focused on students who quietly help others instead of only rewarding high grades, you always said you once knew someone who taught you that character matters more than recognition." Nathan leaned back slowly. He had never realized how deeply those memories had shaped the company he eventually built. After Rebecca quietly left for the evening, Nathan opened an old wooden drawer built into the corner of his desk. Hidden beneath neatly organized documents rested a small weathered cardboard box that had moved with him through every office over the past 20 years. He carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay faded photographs from college, a bookstore employee badge, several handwritten notes, and one folded envelope with Sarah's familiar handwriting across the front. It had never been opened because it had arrived weeks after he had already relocated across the country, forwarded through multiple addresses before eventually finding him during the earliest days of his first startup. At the time, he had convinced himself that opening it would only make leaving more difficult. He had placed it inside the box, believing there would always be another opportunity to reconnect. As he gently traced the edges of the unopened envelope, Nathan realized that 20 years had quietly passed, while one unanswered letter waited patiently for the courage he had never found. Nathan held the unopened envelope for several minutes before finally breaking the faded seal with careful hands. The paper inside had turned slightly yellow with age, but Sarah's handwriting remained as graceful and steady as he remembered. He unfolded the letter slowly, almost afraid that reading it might change everything he believed about the past. "Dear Nathan," it began, "by the time this reaches you, I hope you are already chasing the future you always dreamed about. If life has taken you somewhere wonderful, then please promise me one thing. Do not waste time feeling guilty for leaving. Some people are meant to build bridges that help thousands of strangers cross impossible rivers. I have always believed you were one of those people." Nathan stopped reading for a moment as emotion tightened in his chest. He remembered the afternoon he had accepted an internship on the West Coast. Sarah had smiled and encouraged him to go without hesitation. He had assumed she simply wanted different things from life. He never imagined there had been more she chose not to say. He continued reading. "There is something I never told you because I knew you would refuse to accept it. The scholarship committee offered only one full nursing grant that year. They also had one emergency business scholarship available after another student withdrew. I learned that your financial aid had been reduced, and I knew you were preparing to leave college because you could not afford another semester. I asked the committee to transfer my place so they could reconsider your application instead. They never promised it would work, but a week later you received the scholarship. You thank fate. I thank God. Please never feel like you owe me anything. Watching someone become the person they were created to be is more than enough." Nathan lowered the letter into his lap, unable to continue for several seconds. The scholarship. For 20 years, he had believed his acceptance had come through a fortunate administrative decision. He had built an entire career on an opportunity that Sarah had quietly made possible without ever asking for recognition. He kept reading through blurred eyes. "If we lose touch, I hope life treats you kindly. If one day you ever think about me, I hope it is with a smile instead of regret. The greatest gift we can leave behind is not success. It is making another person's future brighter than our own present." The letter ended simply with her signature and a small handwritten note beneath it. "Please keep choosing kindness, Nathan. The world will always need more of it." He carefully folded the pages together exactly as he had found them. The silence inside the office felt heavier than any board meeting he had ever attended. Every award displayed along the shelves suddenly seemed far less important than the fragile piece of paper resting in his hands. The following morning, Nathan canceled 2 investor meetings for the first time in nearly a decade. Rebecca entered his office carrying his updated schedule, surprised to see entire blocks of time cleared. "Would you like me to reschedule everything for next week?" she asked. Nathan slowly shook his head. "No, I am going to visit Sarah today." Rebecca smiled gently. "Would you like me to arrange transportation?" Nathan looked out across the city before answering. "Just one car. No media. No photographers. No announcements. I am not going there as the chief executive officer of Brooks Global." He slipped Sarah's letter carefully back into its envelope and placed it inside his jacket pocket, close to his heart. "I am going there as someone who has been 20 years late saying thank you." The drive across Chicago felt much shorter than Nathan remembered, perhaps because every traffic light only gave him another moment to wonder what he should say after 20 years of silence. The luxury sedan stopped in front of a modest brick apartment building tucked between an old grocery store and a neighborhood pharmacy. It was the kind of place most people hurried past without noticing. Yet Nathan remained seated for several seconds, quietly taking in the simple balconies, the bicycles leaning against the fence, and flower pots carefully arranged outside several windows. He stepped out carrying nothing except the weathered envelope inside his jacket. No assistants followed him. No cameras documented the visit. He wanted nothing that would turn gratitude into a public performance. As he reached the second-floor hallway, he noticed a familiar voice coming from behind an apartment door that stood slightly open. Emily was laughing softly. It was the first carefree sound he had heard from her. She was helping her mother settle into a chair beside the window where morning sunlight spilled across a small living room filled with books, framed family photographs, and neatly folded blankets. The apartment was humble, but every corner reflected care rather than despair. Emily looked up first and froze in surprise. "Mr. Brooks?" Nathan offered a gentle smile. "I hope I am not arriving at a bad time." Before Emily could answer, another voice came from inside the room. "Nathan." The sound was quieter than he remembered, but unmistakable. Sarah slowly turned toward the doorway. Time had placed silver strands through her light brown hair, and illness had softened the strength she once carried so effortlessly, yet her warm smile remained exactly the same. For a long moment, neither of them moved. 20 years of unanswered questions seemed to stand silently between them. Finally, Nathan stepped inside. "Hello, Sarah." She smiled with calm affection instead of surprise. "I wondered if life would ever bring us into the same room again." Nathan felt his throat tighten. "I should have come a long time ago." Sarah gently shook her head. "Life is not a straight road. Sometimes people arrive exactly when they are meant to." Emily quietly excused herself and walked into the kitchen to prepare tea, sensing that two old friends deserved a few private moments. Nathan looked around the apartment before his eyes returned to Sarah. "I read your letter." Sarah's expression softened immediately. "You finally opened it." Nathan nodded. "Yesterday." A gentle laugh escaped her. "Well, that explains why you look as though you have not slept." Nathan reached into his jacket and carefully placed the folded letter on the coffee table between them. "Everything I built began because of what you did. You gave away your own opportunity so I could have mine." Sarah looked down at the envelope before lifting her eyes back to his. "No, Nathan. I simply believed that your path would reach farther than mine." He shook his head slowly. "You never even told me. Because kindness loses something precious the moment it expects repayment." Silence settled gently across the room. It was not uncomfortable. It was the peaceful silence shared by two people who no longer needed to explain the past. Emily returned carrying 3 cups of tea and quietly placed them on the table. She looked from her mother to Nathan, sensing an invisible history connecting them. Nathan smiled gratefully at her before turning back to Sarah. "There is one thing I came here to say." Sarah waited patiently. Nathan drew a slow breath. "Thank you for believing in someone who had not yet learned how to believe in himself. I have carried your kindness into every decision I have made, even when I forgot where it first came from. I am only sorry it took me 20 years to remember the person who planted that seed." Emily sat quietly beside her mother, trying to understand the conversation that had unfolded before her. She had grown up hearing Nathan Brooks's name only a handful of times, always spoken with quiet respect and never with regret. As a little girl, she had assumed he had simply been an old friend from another chapter of her mother's life. She never imagined that one decision made before she was even born had shaped the future of one of the country's most successful business leaders. Nathan looked toward Emily with thoughtful eyes. "There is something you deserve to know," he said gently. Emily nodded. "I would like to understand." Nathan folded his hands together before speaking. "Your mother never told me she had given up her own scholarship. I believed I earned mine through chance. If I had known the truth, I never would have accepted it." Sarah smiled softly. "Which is exactly why I never told you." Emily looked at her mother in surprise. "Mom, you never mentioned any of this." Sarah reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Because it was never supposed to become a story about sacrifice. It was simply a choice. Sometimes helping another person creates opportunities that reach farther than we can ever imagine." Nathan lowered his eyes, humbled by the simplicity of her words. After a brief silence, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully placed a neatly folded document on the coffee table. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I know nothing I offer could ever repay what you did for me, but I would like to cover every medical expense you have now and in the future. Please allow me to do that." Emily immediately looked toward her mother. Sarah did not even glance at the papers. Instead, she smiled with the same peaceful expression Nathan remembered from their college days. "That is generous," she said softly, "but I cannot accept it." Nathan looked genuinely surprised. "Why?" Sarah answered without hesitation. "Because kindness is not an investment expecting a return. Nathan began to respond, but Emily gently interrupted. May I say something? Both of them turned toward her. Emily took a slow breath. We are grateful beyond words that you came here today. We truly are. But my mother raised me to believe that dignity is one of the few things poverty should never take away. I do not want someone paying our bills simply because of something that happened 20 years ago. Nathan listened without speaking. Emily continued with quiet confidence. If you believe I have ability, then give me an opportunity to prove it. Let me compete fairly for a position. If I succeed, I will know I earned it. If I fail, I will know I need to work harder. Either way, I can still look my mother in the eye. Sarah's smile grew even warmer. Pride quietly filled her eyes. Nathan looked from mother to daughter and suddenly understood that the greatest inheritance Sarah had ever passed on was not money or possessions. It was character. A slow smile finally crossed his face. You sound exactly like your mother. Emily laughed softly. People tell me that all the time. Nathan carefully folded the document again and returned it to his jacket without the slightest disappointment. Very well, he said. No gifts. No special treatment. Only one fair opportunity. Emily nodded. That is all I have ever wanted. Nathan stood and walked toward the apartment window where sunlight illuminated the modest neighborhood below. Looking back at the two women, he realized that true wealth had never been sitting inside the skyscrapers he owned. It had quietly existed for decades inside a small apartment where gratitude, dignity, and kindness still mattered more than anything money could buy. 2 days later, Emily walked through the glass doors of Brooks' global headquarters carrying nothing except a neatly organized resume, a notebook, and the quiet confidence her mother had spent a lifetime teaching her to build. The towering lobby reflected polished marble floors and morning sunlight pouring through enormous windows, yet nothing about the building intimidated her. She reminded herself that every successful person inside had once been unknown. At the reception desk, she introduced herself for the scheduled interview and accepted a visitor badge with a grateful smile. No one treated her differently because she had once spoken to the company's chief executive officer. Her application had been placed in the same hiring process as every other candidate. Upstairs, Nathan watched briefly through the conference room window before quietly walking away. He had instructed the hiring committee only once. Evaluate her exactly as you would evaluate anyone else. If she earns a position, it must belong entirely to her. He never mentioned Sarah's name, never referred to the gala, and never entered the interview room. The panel consisted of 3 department managers and 1 human resources director. They asked Emily detailed questions about financial spreadsheets, budgeting procedures, bookkeeping software, customer communication, and handling confidential information. Whenever she did not know an answer perfectly, she admitted it honestly before explaining how she would learn. Her sincerity impressed the interviewers as much as her technical knowledge. Nearly an hour later, she thanked each person individually before leaving the room with the same calm dignity she had carried inside. As she reached the elevator, Nathan happened to step into the hallway from another meeting. Their eyes met for only a moment. How do you think it went? He asked with a warm smile. Emily laughed softly. I answered every question the best I could. The rest is out of my hands. Nathan nodded with quiet admiration. That is usually where peace begins. Later that afternoon, Nathan visited Sarah once more after finishing work. The afternoon sun filled the apartment with gentle light, while Emily was still returning home from the interview. Sarah sat comfortably beside the window, knitting a small blanket for a newborn at the neighborhood church. Nathan noticed the colorful yarn spread across the coffee table and smiled. You are still taking care of other people. Sarah chuckled. Keeping busy is good medicine. After sharing tea together, Nathan finally asked the question that had remained inside him since reading her letter. Sarah, after everything you sacrificed, did you ever regret your decision? She looked thoughtfully toward the window where children laughed while playing in the courtyard below. Not even once, she answered quietly. If kindness only exists when life is easy, then it was never kindness to begin with. Nathan lowered his eyes. Sarah continued speaking with gentle conviction. Promise me something. He looked back at her. Anything. She smiled. Do not spend the rest of your life trying to repay me. Spend it making sure people like Emily never lose hope simply because they were born without advantages. Help strangers. Open doors fairly. Build opportunities that allow people to stand on their own feet. That is how kindness survives from one generation to the next. Nathan felt the weight of her words settle deeply inside him. He realized that Sarah had never wanted gratitude directed toward herself. She wanted goodness to continue traveling farther than either of them ever could. As he quietly prepared to leave, he looked around the modest apartment one last time. Nothing inside reflected wealth, yet everything reflected purpose. Walking back toward his waiting car, Nathan understood that the greatest legacy any person could leave behind was not measured in buildings, investments, or awards. It was measured in the character quietly passed from one heart to another until complete strangers chose compassion without ever knowing where it first began. 3 months passed, and the quiet promise made inside Sarah's apartment slowly became reality. Emily received a phone call from Brooks Global offering her a full-time position in the accounting department after the hiring committee unanimously agreed that her professionalism, honesty, and determination had distinguished her from every other applicant. When she shared the news with Sarah, neither of them celebrated with expensive dinners or grand gestures. Instead, they sat together in their small kitchen, drinking homemade tea while smiling at each other across the worn wooden table that had witnessed both difficult days and hopeful dreams. It was exactly the kind of celebration Sarah loved most. Emily quickly earned the respect of her colleagues through careful work, thoughtful questions, and a willingness to help others without seeking recognition. Few people inside the company knew anything about her connection to Nathan. To everyone else, she was simply a talented young employee who treated everyone from receptionists to senior executives with the same quiet kindness. Nathan intentionally kept that boundary in place because he wanted her success to belong entirely to her own effort. Several months later, Brooks Global hosted another annual foundation event, but this year the atmosphere felt different. Instead of focusing only on donations, Nathan stood before employees, students, educators, and community leaders to announce the creation of a new national scholarship program dedicated to students who demonstrated extraordinary character while overcoming financial hardship. He paused briefly before revealing its name: the Sarah Parker Scholarship for Compassionate Leadership. A gentle wave of applause filled the ballroom as cameras turned toward the front row where Sarah sat beside Emily. Surprised, Sarah quietly covered her mouth with one hand, never expecting her name to be spoken before such a large audience. Nathan looked directly at her before continuing. Many people believe success begins with talent or opportunity. My own life taught me something very different. Sometimes success begins because one ordinary person quietly chooses kindness when no one else is watching. This scholarship will honor people who help others without expecting anything in return. After the ceremony ended, guests gathered to congratulate Sarah, but she accepted every compliment with the same humble smile she had worn throughout her life. Later that evening, as the ballroom slowly emptied, Nathan joined Sarah and Emily near the windows overlooking the city lights. Emily smiled warmly. My mother always said kindness travels farther than we can see. I finally understand what she meant. Sarah gently squeezed her daughter's hand. Because now you are helping it travel even farther. Nathan looked at both women with quiet gratitude. I spent years believing I built my future alone. The truth is that someone believed in me long before I believed in myself. Sarah smiled gently. Then promise me one last thing. Nathan nodded. I promise. She looked toward the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. When someone unexpected crosses your path again someday, remember that you may be meeting another future you cannot yet imagine. Nathan smiled as he understood that her lesson had never really been about the past. It had always been about the choices waiting in the future. Outside, the evening lights reflected across the skyline while strangers hurried through another ordinary day, never realizing that one quiet act of generosity made decades earlier had continued changing lives long after the moment itself had passed. And perhaps that is how the greatest miracles have always happened, not through wealth or power,